Alright, so the blog for the additions that Tzeentch is getting in the Shadows of Change update has dropped, and I was very curious about this one. Cathay looks like it's getting a lot of cool stuff, but Cathay is a case where Cathay has nothing really to adapt from the tabletop. They're largely just getting to make whatever stuff up that Games Workshop wants or Creative Assembly wants. So there was not a whole lot of indication about the general direction of DLC in the future in terms of what they're adapting and what they are not, and how much they're just going to make up. There wasn't a lot we could pick up for the direction in that way from the Cathay units. It was always going to be stuff that was newly made, because that's all Cathay is, fundamentally. It has to be. Whereas with Tzeentch and Kislev, I was wondering a little bit. Kislev probably going to be newly made up stuff as well. Kislev has not been based too much off the tabletop that we've seen. It's largely aimed for new directions here. And, yeah. Doesn't matter. But Tzeentch, I was wondering with Tzeentch what it was going to look like, especially because we're coming up on Throne of Decay. Though, well, not soon on Throne of Decay, certainly, but in the summer we're going to get Throne of Decay. Throne of Decay is the Empire dwarfs Nurgle. Nurgle, like Tzeentch, is somewhere between being a new faction and an old faction. The Tzeentch faction so far, like pretty well all the other Monogod factions, has been almost entirely made up, if not entirely made up. It's too early in the morning. Well, it's not morning, but it's too recently since I woke up for me to be able to think about it, and I need to stop tapping this desk because it's causing the webcam to wobble. But I wonder how much of it is going to be new stuff and how much is going to be old stuff, especially with the Empire and the Dwarfs, who had definitive army lists on the tabletop. And I wonder if Tzeentch is going to give us, the Tzeentch unit editions we see today are going to give us a general idea of the direction for it. So let me go ahead and hit this blog. The team is still working on how to finish things up, and they need to address a few things they need to address before handing over to you. Making great progress. The release won't be this week. I would imagine it won't be this week. We've still got the Kislev blog to hit. And back later this week with more information on the stuff coming to Kislev. Really? So it's not going to be next week that we get the Kislev blog. Then it's Wednesday today. So that's probably Thursday or Friday we're going to get the Kislev blog. I'll record it when we get to it. Okay, here we go. On to the fun stuff, as it says. So, the feedback on the characters and units with Shadows of Change. So, Tzeentch is the interesting one. Tzeentch did not get any generic lord or hero types, where Kislev got the new Hag Witch hero. Cathay got the Celestial General Lord. Tzeentch didn't get anything. So, that is the question here. Now, I wonder if what we're going to get are, I believe on the tabletop, Exalted Heroes of Chaos could take the mark of Tzeentch, and Chaos Lords could take the mark of Tzeentch, despite not being casters. What I wonder is if we'll get those for Tzeentch in this update, which would be interesting for one thing because it would give Tzeentch some melee heroes and melee lords. It would call into question how they would tie into Tzeentch's general mechanics of wanting to cast as many spells as possible to build up that magic energy on the side. Sorry, felt a little bit sick there. And I think it would also be interesting, at least partly because, if memory serves, that would mean that the sorcerer... Well, it would mean that... Hang on, I'm trying to remember. It would mean that one of the hero types and one of the lord types, when you're playing Warriors of Chaos, would have access to all the marks that they should be able to take. If memory serves. No, I don't think memory is serving on this point. But I'll get to that in a little bit. But that is a little bit odd when you play Warriors of Chaos, that each of the Lord types and hero types you get can only take 2 of the marks, where the Lords and Exalted Heroes should be able to take any of the 4 marks, and the Sorcerer Lord and Hero should be able to take 3 marks, but there's no Sorcerers of Khorne. And we may see progress towards changing that. We'll see. Okay, now back to the reading here, and less speculation. Tzeentch armies have always leaned heavily on magic, but we understand those hard-hitting frontline generals and heroes. Oh, well, actually, I may have been right. So, they got the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch and the Exalted Hero of Tzeentch. There we go. I swear I did not read that before I started talking. This is something I've been wondering about for actually ever since Champions of Chaos DLC released, but especially in the last week since we got the Cathay blog, I was wondering if that was going to be the Lord and Hero type we got for Tzeentch. So that's cool. That's going to be more choices, not just for Tzeentch, but for the Warriors of Chaos in general. That's awesome. And 2 new units. They wanted to broaden the connection between Tzeentch and the Beastmen. That was established with Zongor, Centaurs of Tzeentch. Oh, that's different. I don't think there were marked Centaurs on the tabletop. That's curious. I wonder what that's like, because the Centaurs have always been, when you read the lore for the Beastmen, a little bit odd. Because the other Beastmen are generally pretty devoted to chaos and bringing down civilization. But the Centaurs, what lore they have generally is concerned with them being depressed alcoholics. So, that's interesting. I would think that if any Centaur, like if there'd be any chaos god that would mark the Centaurs, it would be Slaanesh. But yeah, that's neat. I like that. That's curious. So yeah, that's gonna be another new unit, not just for Tzeentch, but for the Beastmen. That's gonna be cool. That's gonna be because the Zongors had the barrier, Centaurs with barrier. That's gonna be crazy. Okay, but they're called just Centaurs of Tzeentch, not Zontagors. I guess it wouldn't work too well with, say, Nurgle, because Nurgle, it's the Pestigors, right? And it has to be Pestigors. You can't do with Nurgle what you do with the other Chaos Gods, where you just put his name in front of Gore. It doesn't work. So, yeah, that's cool, though. And they're having to clarify again, in Warhammer Fantasy, Zongors don't have beaks. It is amazing how Age of Sigmar and 40k can create such expectations for fantasy. It really kind of sticks out. People don't do their research, I guess. Because I wasn't around for Warhammer Fantasy in its lifetime. I'm certainly alive for it, much of it, but I did not get interested in Warhammer Fantasy Battles until 2017, when Warhammer 2 released, which would have been 2 years after the death of the setting. And yeah, just talking about the beak stuff, that's funny, because like, I get the feeling Crave Assembly would love to throw beaks on the Zongors if they are allowed to, but they probably have asked Games Workshop about it, and Games Workshop has definitively said, no, we want to keep this stuff separate. Zongors have beaks in Age of Sigmar and 40k. People don't really make sense of this. That Games Workshop, or rather, can't make sense of this. And admittedly, it is weird. That Games Workshop is very adamant about keeping their settings separate. They really value the brand image here. And a lot of the brand image value stuff comes largely from the fact that Warhammer Fantasy was so easy to rip off by third parties and make imitations. And you can still buy some very nice looking imitations and rip-offs and Warhammer Fantasy rip-offs from a variety of different miniature companies, and there's a good couple armies like the Chaos Dwarfs where it is often more popular to buy the knockoffs than Games Workshop's own work, because Games Workshop's own work is difficult, if not impossible, to get your hands on. So why they devote so much to separating 40k Age of Sigmar Fantasy can seem a little bit more strange, because those are all Games Workshop products, and further, all 3 of them share the same demon army lists. Though I wonder if they're trying to emphasize the difference a little bit more with the fact that you can't play... There is an army list for the demons in the old world, but apparently it's considered to be illegal in tournaments and will not be updated with future editions. And I noticed that that's the case for pretty well all of the army lists in Warhammer Fantasy that have kept the same miniatures going into Age of Sigmar and haven't been changed. I noticed that they made sure to pump out the Cities of Sigmar overhaul, changing everything in the Cities of Sigmar to look entirely different, right before Warhammer Fantasy the Old World's launch. That was really noticeable to me, so that there wouldn't be that brand overlap, where the Empire Great Swords look exactly the same as the Free Guild Great Swords from Age of Sigmar. Anyways, enough of that. And the second unit edition is the Changebringers, a classic Tzeentch unit from the Storm of Chaos book released way back in 2004. I've never heard of this. These flamers ride discs of Tzeentch into battle. Ooh, okay, we'll see about that in a second. Okay, Chaos Lord of Tzeentch. So we have marked characters and units, Champions of Chaos, and they wanted to flesh out some of the missing cast. And yes, the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch will be available for both Tzeentch and the Warriors of Chaos. They have exceptional warrior skills and arcane powers of the Lords of Magic. Okay, I'm going to assume they don't have spellcasting, because otherwise why would you pick the Sorcerer Lord? But I wondered before if the way that the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch is set apart from the other Chaos Lords is if he gets, like, bound casts of certain spells. Maybe that'd be something you could take in his skill tree or something. And he should definitely still have lots of magic buffs. A Chaos Lord of Tzeentch or an Exalted Hero of Tzeentch, I would think, would still have a lot of buffs for the friendly casters. That's a very cool looking Lord model that is taken from some art piece. In, like, ooh, I don't know. Was that the 8th edition Warriors of Chaos armor book? I don't think it was. I don't know where it's from. But yes, that's a very cool art piece that they chose to base the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch off of. He looks sick. And the eyeball shield is just great. Just the head crest in general is crazy. And when we look at the unit, oh, has he got a halberd and shield combination? That's rare. Usually if you get a halberd, you just two-hand it in Total War Warhammer. So, how many other halberd with shield units are there? There's the Celestial Dragon Guard, but that's about it. I know people have called for giving the halberdiers for the Empire shields, but I don't know about that. Okay, we got a gameplay overhaul. He is built for combat. He is adept at fighting monsters and larger creatures. I would expect that. He is great at holding ground through use of expert charge defense and charge reflection. He is Mark of Tzeentch, so naturally he has magical attacks and a barrier. He is a defensive juggernaut. Okay, we've already said that. He can be mounted on a disc of Tzeentch. Okay, that's cool. So a flying, heavy, anti-large lord. And the standard die ability is replaced with change or die, improving leadership and damage resistance. Oh, so he applies ward, the damage ward save. That's nice. And he recharges the barrier of nearby allies. Okay, so he doesn't buff magic. Curious. Okay, so he's going to tend more towards playing either a defensive playstyle where he can defend nearby units, which would be good to defend Tzeentch's casters, or a more defensive playstyle built around heavy defensive armies, largely comprised of probably Warriors of Chaos. That's curious. Interesting, though. And he can take a steed or a chariot mount. Cool. The Exalted Hero of Tzeentch. I assume that's not what the unit's going to look like, that little blister pack dude. So, okay, so he's going to be a... Okay, so they're just taking a moment to highlight the miniature that the Exalted Hero of Tzeentch got on the tabletop. That's cool. And they wanted to give him a suitable model and something different and special. I can understand that. Here we go. Down. What? Oh, that's neat. Okay. So Tzeentchian armor, that is really different armor. That's a very different looking Warrior of Chaos. He's got 3 heads, and they're both Cyclops heads, but the main head has no eyes. Okay, his personality is split into 3 extremes. It definitely calls to mind. It definitely calls to mind Village, right? He's also anti-large. He's also got a halberd. He's not got a shield. Curious. And just making sure nobody's coming in here. The central head controls the 2 other personalities. Okay. So he is, melee specialist, magical attacks, high weapon strength, halberd rather than dual swords, because Tzeentch isn't supposed to be a very infantry sort of army. Good melee defense, expert charge defense, charge reflection, Mark of Tzeentch, anti-large specialist, opportunist. Okay, so he's got the opportunist gimmick that the Skaven chieftain does, where he increases the leadership of the army if the lord dies. Interesting. Okay, that's cool. That fits for Tzeentch, certainly. So, So where the Lord of Tzeentch is a bit more defensive and maybe better as a bodyguard for your various sorcerer heroes, The Exalted Hero is presumably the opposite. If you have a squishy Sorcerer Lord that dies, the Exalted Hero can cover for him somewhat. He also can ride a Disc of Tzeentch alongside the Chaos Steed and Chaos Chariot. That's very cool. Having that guy flying around on a Disc of Tzeentch is going to be different for Tzeentch, because Tzeentch has not really had a particularly strong fighter, lord, or hero. So the prospect of lord sniping or hero sniping with flying units was not really, or with flying heroes or lords of your own, was not really an option for Tzeentch. I suppose you could maybe try and do it with the Sorcerer Lords or Sorcerer Heroes, but But now it's much more of an option, especially because the Exalted Hero of Tzeentch is probably going to be a good bit cheaper than a Sorcerer Hero or Lord, and better at the job. Throw him on a Disc of Tzeentch and he can assassinate enemy lords and heroes. That's interesting. That's a new addition for Tzeentch, certainly. That's very cool. That makes me excited for... That makes me very excited for what Nurgle and Slaanesh are going to get in their Lord packs. Because presumably the Chaos Lord of Nurgle is going to look like... This design for the Chaos Lord of Tzeentch comes from a whole set of art depicting 4 different god-devoted Warriors of Chaos armies. I have to assume then the Nurgle and Slaanesh Lords are going to look like what they did in those art pieces, which is cool, because those are some cool art pieces. But the Exalted Heroes, they don't have quite the same art pieces to pull off of, which then means we've already got the Exalted Hero of Nurgle, but the regular hero-level Sorcerer of Nurgle is probably going to have a pretty wacky design. I'm excited for that. Okay, Centaurs of Tzeentch. They look, about what you'd expect. Yeah, they are expanding the connection between Tzeentch and its many followers. They provide bestial cavalry to what is otherwise a missile and magic-focused army. Okay, so again, giving more diversity to the game plans of these races. I like that a lot with Cathay, that the addition of big flying monsters gave Cathay more offensive viability. And for Tzeentch, Tzeentch is already a fairly cavalry-heavy army in some ways, and this is really going to enhance that. These guys thrown together with Marauder Horsemen are going to give Tzeentch a cheaper cavalry option than the Doom Knights or Knights of Tzeentch, so I'm happy with that. No beaks like in Age of Sigmar. I bet people are going to complain anyways. But I like that they point out deliberately Age of Sigmar, emphasizing, like, guys, pick up the context clues here, read between the lines. We are not allowed to steal Age of Sigmar stuff here. The Zongors will be available to both Tzeentch and Beastmen races. That's gonna kind of put the onus on modders to go through and make god-marked versions of the Centaurs for the other gods, then, isn't it? Ah, well, curious. Beastmen are creatures of pure chaos, and so tend to exalt all 4 ruinous powers equally. However, sometimes a she-gore spawns a whelp that is clearly a chosen one of the Changer of Ways. Its fur patterned with the mark of Tzeentch, or its horns curling to form his unholy symbol. These Centaurs are as bitter and spiteful as their non-Tzeentchian kin, with a stronger resentment of their own clumsy, awkward nature and harboring a deep jealousy of creatures whose minds and bodies are better matched. This feeds their arcane rage and makes them much more dangerous. Having been touched by Tzeentch, it is likely no coincidence. She-Gore. Interesting. The idea of female beastmen has always been a thing that's kind of debated more so, I think, by fans than by Games Workshop themselves. Because there's that old bit of lore about beast does or something being fought for. Was that in Total War? Was that not a follower you could get? An ancillary? But that always seemed weird. It always got called into question that how do the beastmen really reproduce? Because it can't all be orphans left in the woods. And I remember there was some old bits of lore I saw from somebody. It's so difficult to say, because I remember some of my memories of beastmen lore, or at least the beastmen lore regarding female beastmen, or beast women, I guess, came from the wikis. And sadly, the wikis can be edited by anybody, and sadly, not everybody has been responsible with the privilege, or with the right, I suppose. But there's also been, hasn't there been some kind of comment a little bit about there just being regular beast women who aren't too different from the beast men? I don't remember. That might have been a Gotrek and Felix book. But regardless, I do appreciate that. I thought that the gender disparity thing with the Beastmen was a little bit odd, called into question how they can really exist in such numbers if they are either so rare or apparently orphans in the woods. None of that made sense, so I always figured they're probably just regular beast women. This makes a lot more sense. So, yeah, the design's not too different from the standard Centaur. They got more Tzeentchian outfits, little loincloths and belly plates. Blue horns, blue fur, more Tzeentchian axes. So yeah, that all adds up, and that's giving a armor-piercing, notably an armor-piercing cheap cavalry to Tzeentch. So that's cool. Well, I assume they're not too cheap. Centaurs are on the cheaper side for cavalry, especially considering how good they are. But they're still not dirt cheap by any means. They're certainly not Orc Boar Boys or Goblin Wolf Riders, which are about as dirt cheap as cavalry can get. And the Mark of Tzeentch is presumably going to add something onto their cost. But nonetheless, they're going to be cheaper than the Chaos Knights or the Doom Knights, and unlike the Chaos Knights, they're going to have armor piercing. So that's all cool. Probably would make for an interesting combination with the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch then. The Chaos Knights of Tzeentch could be kind of a fast anvil, and the Centaurs of Tzeentch could be a even faster hammer. Interesting. So he's fast, Vanguard deploy, barrier attuned. That's going to be the crazy thing. Any cavalry with barrier is crazy. So they still have Rowdy and Primal Fury. So it's going to be a unit that has barrier and infinite stamina. That's going to be pretty nutty. Because a lot of people underrate the fact that Centaurs have infinite stamina, especially the skirmish variant, the axe throwing variant. And that's very nice to see. Well, it could be quite OP, which would be not great. But it's neat to see for now. They have armor piercing, magical attacks, and the arcane charge ability, which was with the Zongors, but now the Centaurs pick it up. So, offering more synergy with Tzeentchian spellcasters. And that's going to be nice for Beastmen as well, if you're rolling a lot of Bray Shamans. So, you can really start to focus more on a Tzeentch-focused Beastman army. That's very cool. I'm excited. I hope, I'll get to the implications of this after the Changebringers. So the Changebringers, let's see. A unit of Flamers, which fly across the battlefield on discs of Tzeentch. They reach their enemy quick. They keep the pressure on from above. Flamers are capable of a fair turn of speed, expelling gaseous ichor through the fungoid skirt at their base. Fungoid skirt, that's a phrase that's disgusting. At their base to bound and leap across expelling gaseous ichor out of it as well. To bound and leap across the ground with considerable mischievous gusto. A Flamer uses its blazing limbs to hurl bolts of magical flame at the foe. This is not fire in its truest sense, but a roiling cloud of chaos energy. It does not burn, but warps reality. A Flamer's victim might feel briefly invigorated before collapsing into a writhing puddle of flesh. That's just Flamer lore. Okay, so they're exactly as you would expect. They're Flamers put on discs of Tzeentch. How many do you get to a unit? I forget, how many Flamers are in a unit of Flamers? It's about as much as Monstrous Infantry, right? I could be wrong. 16? Maybe it's less. Because the Exalted Flamer you only get one of, right? Maybe I'm just entirely misremembering. I want to say you get 3 to a unit, but that doesn't sound right, because no other unit in the game's like that. Anyways. So yeah, this is... So they're a step up from your normal Flamers of Tzeentch. Maneuverability, speed, agility, increased charge bonus if you want to throw them in melee. Okay, about exactly what they said up there. Armor piercing, flaming attacks, warp flame. They lose a bit out on barrier, and they will be available to both the Tzeentch and the Demons of Chaos. That makes sense. So that is, curious how the balance is going to work on that. Because the Flamer is a very strong unit that can kind of erase many units outright with a single salvo. So, allowing them to fly, that's going to make the Changebringers one of the strongest units in the Tzeentch roster. So that's a curious change. I wonder if these guys may be due for... Let's hope that they're not too cheap, I suppose, in terms of money. Because, boy, these guys could be strong. But very... It's definitely neat to see a Storm of Chaos unit brought in, though. I'll have to look over the Storm of Chaos books again. I don't recall these guys, but I guess I never read the Storm of Chaos books that intently. And when I did, I focused more on the new army lists, like the High Elf Navy, the Cult of Ulrich, the Dwarf Slayer Cult army list. And I probably moved over the Warriors of Chaos and Demons of Chaos army list a bit more. This calls to question, I do remember the Storm of Chaos army list having the 4 demonic chariots, which I can't see Khorne getting a demonic chariot, or Slaanesh, because both of them already have enough chariots. But it makes me wonder if with the Throne of Decay DLC, we might see the Nurgle chariot, which is a chariot tied to a beast of Nurgle, being ridden by plague bearers. That could be curious. But we'll get there when we get there, I suppose. And let's see, what is this last bit? Okay, back later this week. Final blog on Kislev and the new characters and units. I'm excited for that. Okay, so what this makes me wonder is, like I was saying earlier, very poorly and very clumsily, because I was just getting warmed up, I suppose, was Tzeentch is the one out of this trio, Cathay Kislev, that's mostly based off of tabletop stuff. And I was wondering about how they would go about making these additional units for the tabletop army lists, because we're going to be getting 5 units for each of the races in Throne of Decay. Empire, Dwarfs, Nurgle. Nurgle, they've already displayed somewhat of a capacity to make stuff up. Tzeentch, Course of Tzeentch, to my understanding, were never a thing on tabletop. But for the Empire and the Dwarfs, it comes into question because the Empire and the Dwarfs both don't have a lot of units left to add. The Empire really has the Knights of the White Wolf, the Knights Panther, the Celestial Huracanum, possibly the Marienburg Landship. I prefer not, because I prefer for that to stay unique to the Marienburg mod, but that's not my choice. And beyond even that, they're stuck for, like, odd choices like the Blades of Manon, which I think are already a regiment of renown that you get from the Elector Count system, or the Nuln Ironsides, which would just be handgunners with more armor. And the Dwarfs, like, they're really kind of limited to the stuff that never got stats or miniatures. Like of course, the obvious unit the Dwarfs will get in Throne of Decay, and I think we all know it, is the Thunder Barge. It is a big, unique unit that plays a different role for the Dwarfs than for really any other army in the game, and it does not mess with the Dwarf central identity that much as an army list, which is generally very slow, heavy infantry with some lighter flying units that are weak in melee but have strong ranged capabilities. And that's part of my question with the Dwarfs is the remaining 4 units, right? Because out of what's left from the Storm of Chaos army list, there's Doomseekers, but Doomseekers would be hell to animate. They could maybe steal the Slayer Pirates from the Dogs of War, but that'd be weird. There's Malachi McKyson's Trollhewer, but that's also technically a Dogs of War unit, not a Dwarf unit. The obvious one people want there is the Rune Golems and the presumably much bigger singular Rune Guardian. Presumably Rune Golems being monstrous infantry and the Rune Guardian being a big solo monster on its own, single entity. But I've always wondered about those. I want them. They seem cool, but they mess with the Dwarf's fundamental identity as an army list, which is generally not getting monsters. That's curious to me. Now, I guess it's probably not really that set in stone. After all, Kislev on the tabletop did not get any monsters. There weren't even standard Warbear riders. The Warbear was only available as a mount for Lords. Possibly only for Boris Ursus, I don't remember. And yet, we can see Kislev now has a much better army list of monsters than the Empire or Bretonnia. So, clearly out of the civilized human factions, Kislev is supposed to be one of the more monster-heavy factions. So it's going to be curious to see how much they stick to their guns on the Dwarf army list, having that identity or not. Nonetheless, I am very excited to see what we will get all over the place for the Throne of Decay DLC. I bet it's all going to be cool stuff. The fact that it's 5 units and two characters, 3 technically if you count the legendary one, for each of the races, that is a lot of content. That is a lot. I mean, the Shadows of Change DLC is already seeing a tremendous increase in value just from all this stuff they've revealed in the last couple of blogs. Speaking of which, for the next block, well, let me go back to the Tzeentch stuff. I'm curious with the focus on adding God-marked Beastmen. I like that the Chaos sides of these DLC, of these Lord packs, is giving additions not just to the monogods, but to other races. That the Centaurs of Tzeentch are an addition not just to Tzeentch, but to the Beastmen. And the Changebringers are also going to be available to the Demon Prince, to Yuri. I always call him Yuri. Most people call him Daniel. And the two Lords and Heroes are, of course, additions to the Warriors of Chaos as well. So that makes Nurgle and Slaanesh in the future with their Lord packs that much more exciting, because it's not just additions to one race. Even if you don't play Monogods, the Tzeentch Monogod faction, if you do play Beastmen or Warriors of Chaos or Daniel, then this DLC adds content for you. That's quite nice. And we're going to see that pattern keep. And I wonder, it seems to me like a lot of the focus would be on adding more Beastmen types, because that is the obvious one where not only did Games Workshop neglect the Beastmen the longer Warhammer Fantasy Battles went on, to the point that in 8th edition they even got rid of, well, I don't think Beastmen even got a book in 8th edition. But in 7th edition, they got rid of the Beastmen's ability to be marked by the Chaos Gods. And we can see quite clearly, Crave Assembly is undoing that change and bringing back marked Beastmen. And it's going to be curious to see over time that go on. And I wonder if, with Nurgle's got some obvious choices. Pretty well everybody is inclined to the idea that Throne of Decay is going to be Tamarkon, because it makes sense. And with Tamarkon, there's some obvious choices, because there's a couple, a good 3 units I can think of off the top of my head that came with the Tamarkon little expansion on the tabletop, which were the Toad Dragon, the Bile Trolls, and the Rot Knights, all of whom Nurgle does not have access to right now. The Tamarkon campaign also added the Plague Toads, I think their name is. I always get them mixed up, especially because they have a different name when they're being ridden by Plague Bearers. But those are, of course, in Total War Warhammer 3 at launch. Beyond that, there's generally an assumption that the first Nurgle DLC is going to add the Great Spined Chaos Beast, simply because the concept art book for Total War Warhammer 3 includes the Great Spined Chaos Beast. But beyond that, I wonder if we'll see a Nurgle Beastman unit, as that seems like that would cover the obvious remaining gap of we don't have other units to throw in that were from the tabletop. In which case, I wonder if it would be the Bestigors that can take the mark of Nurgle, or perhaps the Minotaurs. I doubt it's going to be the Centaurs. It doesn't really fit with Nurgle's whole theme. But the Pestigors are already a unit established, as are, I think they were called Plague Bulls, Nurgle's marked bulls. It might have just been called Minotaurs of Nurgle. I don't remember for certain, but I do remember that back in either 5th or 6th edition, Minotaurs could be marked for Nurgle. But like the Bestigors, they lost the ability to be marked later on. Regardless, that's all very cool stuff. And it just raises further questions. Kislev is going to be coming up in a day or two, presumably. I doubt they're going to ask somebody to come in on the weekends to upload it. Kislev is going to be an interesting question. Kislev, like Cathay, is probably going to be more so new custom-made stuff. The legendary hero we probably already know is the Golden Knight. Could be different. They could be saving the Golden Knight for future DLC. They've been building her up a fair bit through little bits and pieces of lore surrounding Kislev and the marketing cycle. So they may have wanted a separate DLC to be built around her, especially considering that the Monkey King is very clearly being held back for another Cathay Lord pack. So who knows what we'll get there. We'll get a new generic Lord type for Kislev. That could be pretty cool. It is a little bit odd when you play Kislev right now. If you don't go through the Ice Court mechanic, then the Boyar is the only Lord type you can recruit. That feels a little bit odd. It almost makes you feel like you're playing as one of the races that only gets a Lord type in general. Tomb Kings. Or Vampire Coast, really. They can change the armaments, but it's really the same Lord type. The units, that's a complete toss-up. Presumably they will try to keep with the same theme with Ostankia, of Spirits of the Woods and the like. But it would call into question, if you throw in 2 more units, following that theme, Kislev would almost seem like they'd be overwhelmed with Spirits of the Woods units. Curious to see, though. It's gonna be cool. It's gonna be cool, and I'm excited to, as soon as I see it get thrown up, I will record myself talking about it for everyone who is curious about it. It may be like literally tomorrow. We'll see then. And I will see you folks whenever you next click on a video, I suppose. Later.